The wheels on the bus go round and round and round and round. Ecclesiastes 1:18. If you have read it, you've got to think right away, bummer. Those aren't very inspiring words. Those aren't uplifting words. Those are really, what do we do with words like that? The end of that chapter says, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results only in increasing pain. We will come back to that in just a moment. This morning we are talking about stress. Stressed out, and it is killing us. We know that stress and health are coupled. There have been at least 17 different major, it says, reasons to avoid stress. And we'll come back to that as well, because you cannot avoid stress, and really that's extremely poor recommendation. 17 things. Increased headaches. When stress is a rule and it isn't dealt with, you're going to have increased headaches. You're going to have increased hair loss. You're going to have issues with memory, psoriasis, insomnia. A study just was recently done that when stress is not taken care of, it's shown to double the risk of developing a sleep problem. Heart attacks are linked to stress. Higher cravings for sugar and fat. It worsens asthma if you have asthma. Gives you digestion issues and problems. Back pain. Your blood pressure. Blood sugar. You age quicker. Chronic stress has been shown to affect the length of the telomere, which is a key indicator in the premature stage of aging. It affects your immune system, fatigue, sex drive, belly fat. All these things are medical results of stress that is not properly addressed. As I was writing this, I heard on a PBS show in the background, it said, we live in a very stressful time, which is, it may be true, but it's not any truer than any other time. Humans have always been human. And there's really not one iota difference between the caveman and us. The needs are the same, the cravings, the desires. He had to worry about things, we worry about things. Nothing essentially has changed. As Ecclesiastes chapter tells us, nothing new under the sun. It's just repackaged. It may be that we worry in context differently or stress in context differently, but 100 years ago, the basic needs of humanity were the same as they are today. We worry about the ones we love. We worry about having, enough. We worry about being healthy and happy and fit. We stress out when those fundamental aspects of our humanity are at risk or challenged. So we don't live in a more stressful time. Whatever happened to the promise of science and technology? Our science and technology are further advanced, but they haven't cut down our stress. Some would argue that they've increased our stress. But we are in a time when stress, as it's always been, will be a part of our lives. There is no escaping it. The question is not how to avoid stress, because you cannot avoid it. In fact, trying to avoid it will increase it. We need to instead learn how to live well. Ecclesiastes 1:18 says that thinking Okay, let's go back to that. It says that much wisdom brings much grief. That's where the saying ignorance is bliss, it comes from this. Much wisdom, there's much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. What it's talking about, again, it takes both hands. It's true on the one hand. It's true on the one hand. And on the other hand, it is a necessity to break through it. What it's telling us is that you can stress out by thinking about stress. You can get stressed over trying to avoid stress. You can get stressed out by trying to deal with stress, by trying to think about stress. That having knowledge about stress that does all these physical things to us can stress us out. So you might be saying to yourself, preacher, why are you stressing us out? Because on the other hand, knowing that the solution isn't in the knowledge and more knowledge about it, but the solution is somewhere else, is important. When we talk about stress, we're talking about all of those items of our humanity, all of those words that go along with it. Worry. We got any worriers? We're talking worry and being worried about things. We're talking about stress and being stressed. We're talking about fatigue. We're talking about anxiety and anxiousness. We're talking about nervousness. We're talking about being at the end of my nerves. I heard somebody the other day say, you're getting on my last nerve. Okay, we're talking about fretting. We're talking about all those emotions and feelings that have physiological results. That the thoughts that we have make our body respond. It has been said that life, and this is Ecclesiastes, I believe, says the same thing. Life is 10% of what happens, and 90% how we respond and react to it. 10% of what happens and 90%, that is the majority of what happens in our lives, and therefore the majority of our physiological responses are ours and our responsibility. People, things can happen, people can do things outside of our reality, come into our reality, that only accounts for 10% of our experience. It has to be filtered through our experience. It has to be filtered through our perception. It has to be filtered through our understanding, through our grid. So 90% of what goes on is the result of how we see it, how we approach it, how we view it, how we understand it. Ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience both teach us that changing how we think about stress can help you live healthier. Can help you live healthier. Because ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience both say that what goes beyond between your ears and the gray matter in your brain, in your thoughts, that is the key. It's in your thoughts. And you can't avoid. It's impossible to avoid, and in fact, most of the time when you try to avoid, just the opposite happens. Just the opposite happens. Psychologists, since about the 1980s, have been studying this, and it's a study in sort of paradoxical thinking. Some call it reverse psychology, but Wigner in 1987 performed what he called the white polar bear experiment. He took a group of people, and he put them in a room without any distractions. There was just a little buzzer. And he said, for 5 minutes, I want you to sit here, and I want you to think pleasant thoughts. I want you to be serene. I want you to be happy. And whatever you do, I don't want you to think about white polar bears. And if you think about white polar bears and you hit the buzzer, every time you think about a white polar bear, hit the white buzzer. Well, they had found within those 5 minutes, each of the persons rang the buzzer at least 6 times, even though they were told not to think about white polar bears. Now, the experiment went on for another 5 minutes. He said, this time with this group and with this group, I want you to ring the buzzer when you're able to think about a white polar bear. Go ahead and think about white polar bears. And what they had found out is that this group that originally was told not to think about them was able to ring the bell and think about them twice as much as the group that was told just to think about them. It's what's called the rebound effect in psychology. It's part of our humanity. When we are told or we attempt to avoid something or not to do it, we have a tendency to do it even more. Suppressing our thoughts of polar bears for 5 minutes cause the thoughts to bounce back at even a higher rate than those who did not suppress or deliberately try to not think about them. The same happens to us with unwanted thoughts and unwanted urges. I can tell you, whatever you do right now, do not think about a Christmas tree. Don't do it. Whatever you do, don't think about a Christmas tree. And what happens is, we can't help it. It's part of our humanity. It's part of who we are. So when we have unpleasant thoughts, when we have urges, those things that stress us out, when we try to avoid them, when we try not to think about them, you're almost assuring yourself double whammy. Avoidance, trying to control your thoughts and push them out, is going to cause you more stress and greater failure. This happens with our thoughts, our urges. The more we try to avoid, the more we try to suppress, the stronger they become. Intrusive thoughts, intrusive thinking is what brings and what keeps and what causes us the most harm in the stress world. Stress is brought by these intrusive thoughts, these thoughts that something ill may take place, something ill may happen, I may not survive, or somebody may not do well, or it may not work. These intrusive thoughts are what is the basis and foundation of our stress. And what it does to us, it actually releases into our bodies stress hormones. Where animals, fight or flight or freeze are our options. And when these stress hormones are released into our bodies, it causes us to make a choice. Either to fight, become defensive, stand our ground, or flight, run, get the heck out of there, or we're just overwhelmed, we freeze. We freeze. Anybody ever see a fainting goat? That is, they don't have that fight or flight element in their being like other animals do. They just have the freeze. They get afraid, they just fall over and faint. Sometimes in stressful situations we can do the same thing, just freeze. But our bodies produce and dump into our system these hormones so we can do something. Fight, flight, or we're just overwhelmed and we freeze. Physiological responses. Our brain produces these chemicals, drops them into our systems. Thought suppression or avoidance of whatever it is that stresses us out only makes it worse. So we're not to avoid the stressors, but we're not to dwell on them. So what do we do? What do we do? The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round. We're all bus drivers. It's a good analogy, a good metaphor. We're all bus drivers. And in our buses, we have passengers. We didn't invite them necessarily, they're just there. And these passengers will often shout out at us things that sort of distract us from driving the bus. They shout out things like, "You're stupid, you can't do it, forget about it." Or, "What if, what if, what if, what if, what if?" And the seat right behind them, there's another one that says, "You can't, you can't, you can't." And the seat right behind them is one of those, "You've tried that before. the seat behind them is another one who yells out. All of these buses that we're driving have all these voices in them. You're weak, you're no good, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're fat, you're short, whatever. There's always these voices in this bus that we're driving. Now we can stop the bus and we can say to these voices, you guys, you got to be quiet. I'm driving this bus, I'm moving ahead, I'm going forward, you got to be still and leave me alone. And you know what happens? They shout even louder. They shout even louder and become more distracting. So you say, get off my bus. And they say, oh, we're not going anywhere. And they don't go anywhere. They stay there even more firm. And pretty soon you got this bus full of all of these voices yelling at you, saying things to you. What do you do? What do you do? You recognize and you do four things. You recognize and you do four things. Everybody here is a bus driver. Everybody has passengers in their bus. You just accept that. And you accept them in a non-judgmental way. They're just there. They're there. Everybody has them. So the first thing is you don't judge yourself about them, about your passengers. You understand, being human, everybody drives a bus. Everybody has these voices from past experiences, from past episodes. Some of them sound like moms and dads. Some of them sound like former teachers. Some of them sound who knows what. But there they are. There they are. Some of them sound an awful lot like your own voice, doubting your own self. Like, oh, think of what happens if you fail. Think of what happens if you don't get this or you don't do that. Everybody has it. The second thing, when you realize you're in discomfort about these passengers, you just recognize, okay, they're there. And all they are thoughts. That's all they are. They're thoughts. I don't have to say if they're true or they're false. They're just thoughts. I just know that they're there. And I decide that I'm going to drive the bus forward, and the voices are going to be there, the sounds are going to be there, the thoughts are going to be there, but I'm not going to put a lot of weight on them. I'm just going to decide to drive. I'm going to decide to go forward and drive towards what is good for me, for my life. The voices will not disappear. The voices will not go elsewhere, and they won't stop. Those thoughts will always, the voices are thoughts, and the thoughts will always be there. And when you're stressing, it's because you're listening and you're giving weight to the thoughts, the voices, more than going forward. Going forward. And so what you can do is ask one very important question. When you find yourself stressing, it means I'm driving my bus, the voices are loud, I'm paying attention to the voices. You ask yourself a question. And the question is very simple, and yet it gets us to the bottom and the root and the foundation of our stressing. And the question is this: what is it I really want? Anytime you have difficulty in your thinking, anytime you are stressing, anytime you are worried or fretting, ask yourself, what is it that I really want? What is it that I want to happen? What is it that I want to do? What is it that I'm afraid of? What is it that I really want? And often what you will find is you will find that which you think you want, you'll laugh at. Because 99% of the time, what it is you want is the same thing Adam and Eve wanted back in the garden. We haven't changed one iota. It's the same thing. We want to be God. I worry and I stress. What is it you really want? I want this situation to go according to my will. That's a God thing, isn't it? If I could just will this to happen the way I want it to happen, oh, there I am, trying to be God. You see, that's where our stress comes from. Our stress comes from not being human, but running from our humanity. When I'm stressed out because I'm worried about whether or not I'll get that job, Jesus speaks a lot about this, doesn't he? Can worry increase your lifespan 1 inch? No! It can't. In fact, it can subtract from your lifespan. When we're trying to be something other than what we truly are, human, when we're trying to be God and we're stressing out because we want the world to respond and to react and to fall into place to our designs, that's a God thing. Children, we worry about children. Yes, we want them to be okay, we want them to be happy, we want them to be safe. How much of that is a result of our worrying? None! We can't worry that into reality, can we? We can't stress it into reality. We can't be God. But I can be human. And there are things I can do when I'm not stressing. And one of them is being healthier. When we are trying to be something other than human, we become ill. Makes sense, doesn't it? If you were trying to be a goldfish, you'd be sick pretty quick, wouldn't you? If you tried to live underwater and ate that goldfish food as your diet and tried to be a goldfish, that isn't what you are. We're also not God. And so when we try to be God, it kills us. It kills us. Jesus says, worrying does not increase your life 1 iota, 1 span. Be human, be real. When you hear the voices telling you, and I don't mean, well, if you really hear voices, that's one thing, but we all have the self-talk that goes on all the time. We're always talking. We always got this conversation in our head going. It's always there. And if the conversation is leading us to wanting to be God and fixing everything instead of being in acceptance and trusting God, that's faith, trusting God. So if we are stressed out, and if we're stressing, we realize we don't have to listen to those voices. They're there. Everybody's got them. It's what being human is. But we go in the direction of our calling to be healthy humans with integrity. And we ask, what is it that I really want? What's really making me worried, stressful? What's causing me this grief? Finding the answer to that brings us to the point where we have dealt with, not avoided, where we have dealt with and not dwelled on what causes us the stress. We were not designed to die from stress. Stress is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's good. You couldn't get out of bed in the morning if there wasn't some stress. Stress is something we accept. It's like friction. Without friction, you couldn't walk, you couldn't stand, you couldn't move. It's a part of our physical reality. So is stress. But unchecked stress, undealt with stress, is a killer. May God help us deal with it and trust in Him. Amen.
Amen.